The Saxon Wolf by Angus Donald. Fireborn, Book 2. Narrated by Ade Dimberline. Part 1. Spring 773. Prologue. Blackness rising. The shield maiden stood perfectly still in the line of warriors, a warm trickle of shame running down the inside of her leg. This was not her first battle by any means, nor was she the only fighter to have released her bladder in fear that day. But she was surprised at herself, revolted by her lack of control. Around her stood several of her comrades, folk of the north, all well armed and armoured, and their commander, a Danish jarl, who stood to her left and a little behind the line of shields. The shield maiden hoped no one in that press of humanity would recognise her abject terror. She had a reputation for fearlessness that she cherished. Her features might be pretty, her body might be slender and short, her limbs wiry rather than powerful, but she could fight. And until this day, she had truly believed that she was dauntless. Evidently not. The fear roiled in her guts like a poisonous eel, icy and ever-moving. Her leather trews were soaked through now with her own sweat and wastes. And were it not for the crush of warriors about her, she would have been tempted to run as fast as she could from this horror-filled gore patch, to preserve her frail young life from certain destruction. In the air directly above her, a lone red kite circled the battlefield, waiting for its reward, and away to her left, impatient crows hopped and squabbled among the fallen. The bully sun beat down, a great molten disk of metal in the perfect blue sky. She stood in the second line, just below the crest of the small ridge. She and her comrades had not yet engaged in this life and death struggle. But it must be soon. The waves of battle must crash over her very soon. She could hear the sounds of slaughter, the rip and wrench of human flesh, the constant screaming, the shouts of rage and joy. The raw reek of shit and blood coated her tongue. The din of steel smashed against steel relentlessly, the rattle and slap, clash and clatter of blades, pounding tattered mail and battered shields. And nearby, a young man crying out softly for his mother. Her body was shaking, despite the heat of the day. "Stop," she ordered herself. "Stop this." She bit a fold of her lower lip until the blood ran coppery sweet, but her hands still trembled. She knew she would vomit again soon. Abruptly, the front rank of her comrades was swept away. The thin line of warriors hurled this way and that, shot down with evil, hissing arrows, or battered into bloody ruin by the whirling enemy blades. The battle noise, that awful din, was much louder now, and all around, suffocating, numbing, and suddenly there, revealed as if by a swiftly ripped-back curtain, stood a dread monster from a heathen nightmare, an enormous creature of black fur and fresh, dripping blood. Clad in gore-clotted mail and a vast, sodden bearskin cloak, and holding a bearded axe in one huge paw, the wrecker threw back his great shaggy head, opened his maw, and roared at the clear vault of the sky. A bold champion stepped from their ranks to challenge this dread monster, a massive, shaven-headed fighter, a young, bare-chested warrior, strong as a full-grown ox, the trusted bodyguard of her jarl. He bellowed his own challenge at the wrecker and struck out hard at the creature. Behind him, the girl hefted her shield, snatched a quick instant to wipe the sweat from her brow, and when she looked again, the champion was down. The battle-mad berserker's axe buried half-deep in the young man's bare chest. Another warrior leapt on the monster's back, stabbing in hard, but the wrecker plucked the attacker off like a cloak, and, holding his head in one hand, he pulled out his seax, a long, brutal fighting knife, and jammed it into the squirming man's neck, before dropping him like a rag to the turf. The monster's gaze now fell directly upon the terrified shield maiden, his mouth grinning broadly. She could see blood spittle and bare square teeth in the blood-red hole. His eyes were black as jet, huge and mad. He took a step towards her, the bloody seax gripped in his right hand. He made a deep humming sound as he advanced inexorably on her small, trembling form. She shouted, "Bjarki! Stop it! You love me as I love you. You know it inside the real you. Stop! Come back to me. You cannot hurt me." The wrecker did not seem to hear her. Her comrades were fleeing, melting away before this appalling creature. She felt their absence, a space around her, and now stood alone on the grassy slope, face to face with this unholy being of such hideous power. Her sword was forgotten in her hand, her shield dropped. She shouted, a last time, "No, no, please, Bjarki, it's me!" "No talking!" the wrecker bellowed. He slashed at her with his dripping sayax. She stumbled backwards, tripped on her own feet, fell flat on her rump. Bjarki leaped on top of her, landing like a cat on knees and elbows, straddling her winded body. She stared up into the twisted face, twitching, spattered with frothy blood, the face of the man she loved, the monster she loved, and felt his sharp steel pierce her belly and loins again and again, a series of brutal punches. She felt no pain, just his weight on her body, and a deep sadness, and an icy coldness, a void, blackness rising till it filled her whole world. Chapter 1. A Joyful Reunion. When in doubt, go north. Bjarki Bloodhand lifted his heavy arms into the cold air and stretched out the knuckles of his aching spine. He pondered this maxim of his dead father, one of the few shreds of wisdom the battle-crazed old brute had passed on to his son during their short acquaintance. When in doubt, go north. That was what the old man had said. So Bjarki duly stared out at the bruise-coloured, breeze-rifled surface of the harbour of Rerick, and beyond its wide bay to the Ostmar, the eastern lake. He watched the half-dozen fishing craft, tiny at this distance, as they scudded across the horizon. Out there somewhere, perhaps 100 grey miles across the ocean, north and a little west, was his home. Or rather the muddy fly-speck of an isle he had lived on for the first handful of years. If Bjarki went north, as his father's ghost might have counselled, he'd be going toward Bago Island, and if not actually to his home, certainly into the Danemark, the realm of King Siegfried. If he went back there, he would most likely be returning to the grinding tedium of life as a bondy, a free man, but still a poor one, a drudge, and if not to the very same fish-stinking hamlet of his miserable upbringing, then somewhere similar. But worse than that, if Bjarki did go north, he would be admitting defeat. He would be conceding that his bright and shining dream was finally dead. And Bjarki wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Rerick was a grubby polyglot port on the north coast of one of the Wendish territories, east and north of the River Elbe, which was controlled by Prince Wislaus, the lord of a local tribe known as the Oberdrites. Ships from across the Ostmar, from as far east as the lands of the Estonians and Finns, stopped at Rerick to trade in thick furs, in sun-filled amber, bars of cold iron, hardy slaves, and resin-scented pine trunks destined to become timbers for the dragon ships that local rights worked on along the shore. The traders came here as well, to buy up the huge hempen sacks of precious salt produced here, and bundles of woolen cloth, and barrels of herring, and the several types of grain produced by Wendish husbandmen inland. The man Bjarki had laboured so long for on this chill day at the tail end of winter, a rotund fellow called Burrick, a cousin of the local lord, had an enormous estate under the plough to the south of Rerick, where hundreds of his poor thralls grew barley, rye, and oats in vast quantities to feed the ships. Bjarki bent down and hefted the last of the huge barley sacks. He jerked it up on his shoulder with a soft grunt of pain, turned and began to plod under its immense weight into the gloom of the warehouse, a dozen yards from the slop of the harbour water. Each sack weighed as much as a small, limp man, a corpse, perhaps, and Bjarki had been doing the same lifting action again and again since before the first pinks of dawn. Now, as evening thickened the salty air, his gargantuan task was nearly accomplished. He entered the huge space of the warehouse and heard the familiar scurry and squeak of rats in the lurk of the shadows, an inescapable part of any place that stored grain. He staggered a little then, his knees buckling under the grind of this endless day, his breath coming in faster. Slowly, painfully, he began to climb the sagging steps made from piled sacks to the top of the barley mountain, where he dumped the last one in its place at the summit. He rested for a moment, sitting on the bulging hemp, head swimming with...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?